Welcome to OTR Debate, our off-the-record podcast where three lawyers debate all things while trying to find out how it comes back to the law. I'm Huy, I work in government, and I'll be the judge for today's episode, which is the Aliens franchise versus the Terminator franchise. I'm here with our debaters today, Mucci.
Hi, I'm Mucci. I work in immigration.
I'm Lando. I'm a prosecutor, and I'm doing Terminator.
And I'm doing Aliens.
Right.
Ironically, since one of our first episodes is Aliens versus Ghosts, where I
Yeah.
consistently take a ghost.
Yeah, and aliens exist, so... But in this context, I think the franchise a little lacking on the alien side, so...
Well, we can definitely get into that.
Definitely some aliens in it.
In maybe 30 seconds. But as always, the format of this debate is much like a trial that will have opening statements. Then I will ask some questions as the judge. We'll have a recess and then closing arguments. So you guys ready to get started?
Yeah,
Yeah, sounds good.
let's do it.
All right.
I'll start. So Alien, the franchise, was started in 1979 with one of the most original and unique horror films ever made, and followed up 7 years later with a sequel that is regarded as one of the best sequels ever made, but is completely different from the original. Its own distinct, its own unique take on this concept of these xenomorphs or these aliens. And you'll see that again and again throughout the franchise. Different risks being taken, different directors trying their hand at this franchise, and some succeeding, some not so much, but at least there's the attempt to make something different each time. And really the highlight of the series, though, is the design of the aliens themselves. These like very unique creatures that are not these hyper-intelligent creatures, but they're very feral and animalistic. And it's a really interesting, different depiction of aliens in this franchise.
Cool. Orlando.
So for the Terminator franchise, you have Arnold Schwarzenegger, one of the biggest action stars in the last couple decades. We've talked about him in one of our previous episodes. The Terminator 1984 until essentially this year just came out, Terminator Zero. This franchise has gone in many different directions. Started off pretty much like a slasher movie with a Terminator, right? So the Terminator, Arnold, was just stone-faced, hunting down his prey, aliens versus predator.
Predator.
And they're painted as these Terminators that are just killing machines that are terrifying. Throughout the series, throughout the franchise, it's taken different directions, but essentially that at its core, which Terminator Zero is kind of bringing back out with some of the visuals, is a horror type setting based around this apocalyptic future. Brings in time traveling elements that are just crazy and wild and go all over the place. So it's a great franchise, and Arnold's cool.
You guys ready to get into the questions?
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think so.
but are you going to explain why you almost just had a face hugger come out of your body at this point?
It might have been a xenomorph, but I think it's just my cat allergies.
Okay.
Might have been.
So,
Okay. For those not watching this, just listening, he had a little bit of an episode just now.
it's trying to hold in a sneeze or an alien. I don't know.
And it burst out.
Yeah. Well, hopefully nothing bursts out of my body throughout this episode. Maybe after. All right. So you guys ready to get in the questions?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
So I think for our listeners and viewers, as well as myself, I'm not that familiar with the franchise of either of these. Could you guys kind of explain the storyline of both Aliens and Terminator?
Sure. I could start, Booch.
Go ahead.
All right, so Terminator 1 and 2, both directed by James Cameron, are really the top tier of the Terminator franchise. Basically, it's a storyline of AI becoming sentient in the future and basically seeing humanity as a threat to itself and using our nukes to basically wipe out most of humanity. In doing so, there's still some people around. They're called the Resistance. They're led by an individual named John Connor, who coincidentally or not coincidentally, I named my dog after. So in case you guys didn't know, my dog's first name is John. So he's basically the leader of the human resistance and the Skynet, the program that basically controls all of the machines in the future, sends back a robot back in time to kill the mother of John Connor, so Sarah Connor. So Terminator goes back in time. It's a learning computer. He's learning, is adapting as he's in the past, to prevent basically John Connor from being born. That sets up the scene for everything that comes after. T2 comes out. There's a new Terminator. There's a new threat. Arnold is the T-800 that went back in time the first time. Second time, he's the one that's protecting John Connor as a teenager when there's a new, more advanced robot that's trying to kill him. From there, shit gets crazy. So those two movies, they come out kind of similar in time. There's a little bit of a break, a new director for the third one. That one kind of sucked. After that, basically...
But what's it about?
The third one is
You don't need to know. It's okay.
So I mean, what I was getting at was that the Sarah Connor Chronicles comes out. It's a series based on her and John Connor, and it takes place directly after T2, Terminator 2. Completely forgets about Terminator 3, which is essentially John Connor is like a doped up guy. His mom, Sarah Connor's dead. He's kind of living.
Doped up how? You mean like?
He's kind of. I think he's a drug addict. Yeah, I think he's a drug addict. He's like indigent. He's like living on the streets. And he has this pressure of like, will the robots come back? We thought we stopped Doomsday, Judgment Day from happening, but maybe not. I don't know. We'll see. He's like, he's kind of crazy a little bit. And then a new Terminator comes out. T-800 comes back to save him. Arnold comes back to save him from this new Terminator that's, big and more advanced. And essentially, movie ends up with him and John Connor and his future wife being saved by this Terminator, Arnold. Essentially, his main mission, as assigned to him by John Connor's wife, was to protect them when the nukes fall. So it ends there. Like I said, Sarah Connor Chronicles completely forgets that. Terminator Salvation picks up kind of after that, not really. Essentially, that's like set in the future during the war of the robots and the man. Christian Bale is John Connor, which is kind of badass. I really liked him in that role. Didn't do so good. 2015, Terminator Genesis. This was one where a Terminator gets sent back in time to save Sarah Connor from a Terminator. So basically, kind of like essentially the first movie, but when Kyle Reese, the soldier sent back by John Connor, goes back, he sees that Sarah Connor is already being protected by this robot. Arnold Schwarzenegger, the T-800, she calls him Pops. He got there long before, I guess, Terminators killed her parents. He basically raised Sarah Connor, and the whole timeline's all fucked up.
Weird.
It's all different. So
is this one where they have like this like slicing machine that can go through like fences and stuff?
That's T2. I mean, I think from T2 on, from Terminator 2 on, there's some element of being able to slice and dice and stuff, because Terminator 2, the T-1000, he's like liquid metal. Probably the coolest one.
Okay.
He's the coolest one.
We're
really.
finding out we've seen Terminator 2.
Well, I think I've seen shorts of it at least.
Yeah, I mean,
like
it's
on YouTube Shorts.
that is-
we're also on YouTube Shorts, by the way.
Yeah.
There you go.
So
I think that's where I've seen that.
yeah. Mucci mentioned that Aliens was like one of the best sequels to a franchise. I would argue that T2 is probably like top 3 sequels to a franchise, because it's pretty much undeniable that that's the best movie in the franchise.
I'll give you that, but then Aliens is number 2.
Okay, well, Aliens, yes. So there's Genesis, and then that was supposed to get 2 sequels, or at least a sequel to that movie, because it was kind of retconning everything. The T-800 gets like at the end Arnold gets upgraded so that he's kind of becoming liquidy somehow. John Connor was, he was a Terminator, I guess, like somehow, like in the future he gets like injected with like nano robots. He becomes a Terminator somehow.
Starting to sound like a fanfic that they made.
It really did. It really seemed kind of messed up. That went kind of awry. Didn't happen. Terminator Dark Fate, the latest movie in the installment in the franchise, again directed by James Cameron. So this is the third James Cameron Terminator, 2019 Mooch. Arnold is in it again. The only one he really wasn't in was Terminator Salvation with Christian Bale. He did a cameo. Essentially, the storyline.
Was he the governor at the time? He might have been.
Yeah,
the Governator.
Yeah, 2009. That probably checks out.
Probably, yeah.
That checks out. In Dark Fate, Arnold, the Terminator T-800, he goes by Carl, I guess. It's a timeline where picks up after the first two, like I said. He ends up, because Terminator 2 ends up with, John Connor being a teenager. The T-800 is killed. Their T-800 is killed. And then they're off in Mexico and they're kind of training for this potential upcoming Judgment Day. Well, shortly after T2, another Terminator, a T-800 comes in, kills John Connor. So John Connor's dead. That Terminator, Carl, stays in that timeline, ages, starts learning, kind of feels guilty. He basically adapts to humankind. And Sarah Connor's there, and she tries to protect the new leader or main figure in the resistance. Essentially, a new replacement for John Connor after he's killed. So things are somewhat similar, somewhat different in that one, but that's kind of where it leaves off. Finally, Terminator Zero, that's just out on Netflix now. I've seen a couple episodes, haven't seen it all, but as of my last check, 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, so pretty good, Mucci. I know you said there was mixed reviews, but I think it seems pretty good.
I was off mic. Was it off mic conversation?
Oh, shit.
Record.
Privy. So I'm really hoping, I'm hoping that it's sheds a positive light to Terminator 7, which James Cameron was kind of thinking about or holding off on, I guess.
Isn't he too busy with the Avatar sequels?
Yeah, they're directing it for the next 25 years or something. I don't know. I never saw
one movie every decade. And a half.
And a half.
Half movie after.
I never saw the first one of that either.
Oh, that's pretty good. First one's pretty good, but then it should have stayed in the past. Like the Terminator.
So how many films total? There are how many Terminator films?
So the next one would be 7, so that'd be 6.
Plus the Terminator Zero is like a series.
Terminator Zero is an anime that's on Netflix. It kind of gets back to, at least from what I've seen, first couple episodes, gets back to Terminators are scary. This is like a slasher horror kind of thing from the visuals I've seen. In some of the other movies, it's kind of okay, it's Arnold because he's older now, and it's not as intimidating because you have to have Arnold's face on it. Whereas,
is he voice acting at all in the anime or
no?
Oh, okay.
He's not. Not that I know of. I don't believe so. I think he's kind of disconnected, and I think he's also made a statement that he wants to be done with the franchise at this point. It's probably a good thing. But the thing that made Terminator so good before was that when Arnold was unknown for the first one, he was just this stoic, kind of monster figure because he was huge. And then once he starts ripping off his face and you see the red eye, it's super scary, But now, since they've had so many movies with him in it, and he's aged, and he's, trying to get some of his one-liners in there, it's not as intimidating, But the anime is kind of doing that. It's also kind of different because it's set in Japan. There's some moral questions to it. There's some philosophical kind of things that are going on with it. So it's pretty good. I like it. It's kind of a different thing because the last couple of movies have kind of been the same repeat of hunter victim kind of thing. And it's just, but hopefully they make another one.
So they made Terminator Evangelion?
I wouldn't say that.
The reboot series?
But I don't know because I haven't seen Evangelion yet.
All right. Should we go on to Alien franchise?
Yeah. So it can be a little confusing, but basically the first 4 movies are all starring Sigourney Weaver as Ellen Ripley, just dealing with these xenomorphs in various ways. But jumping ahead just to the newer movies for a second, and I'm going to leave aside the Alien vs. Predator movies because I don't really... They're their own thing, I think. But the earliest chronologically then is 2012's Prometheus. And that takes place in 2089. And it's in that movie, archaeologists on Earth discover a star map that matches some others from these ancient civilizations. And they eventually think that this is a message from the progenitors of mankind, that from some different planet out in the solar system. So an expedition takes...
Solar system?
Or, I don't know, somewhere in the galaxy.
Thank you.
Universe?
Thank you. I don't know, speaking extemporaneously here. But so basically they go on this expedition on this vessel called Prometheus. That's how it gets its title. To follow the map to this distant moon where they discover ruins of an ancient advanced civilization. And they also, the advanced civilization, by the way, is called the Engineers. And so those are the ones that are like the progenitors of mankind. And they were developing biological weapons to basically drive humankind extinct. And that kind of is, I guess, in a way, what the xenomorphs are meant to be. These like unthinking and very feral, they only have one goal in mind kind of things are designed as like weapons to take down humankind. And that's kind of what you'll see over time. That's kind of what they're utilized as. That this corporation, Weyland-Yutani, is basically trying to get a sample of them, the xenomorphs, to develop a weapon. So then we go to Alien Covenant, which came out 2017. It takes place 11 years later from Prometheus, and it involves a journey to an engineer homeworld. And several crew members, when they get to that planet, are infected by this the same mutagen that was found by the Prometheus crew. And they give birth to a new breed of alien, the neomorphs. But basically that's one where you find out that the AI from Prometheus, he has been like on this other planet the whole time and has been developing xenomorphs, basically, and has been doing tests and stuff.
I keep seeing him on...
Fassbender?
Yeah, I keep seeing him on like TikTok reels, like TikToks, where it's... And it's always Prometheus clips. I'm like, man, this looks fucking good. And then I'm like, wait, I've seen part of this. Like, but why is he still in it? Like, because I thought he died or something. Was it?
Yeah, there's like...
think that he died or something?
In Covenant, he plays two roles. He plays the guy from the previous film from Prometheus, who he survived with one of the other passengers, but then manipulated it so that she died and that he could then run his experiments on her. And basically he's running these experiments of these aliens that eventually hatch out of humans, that impregnate and hatch out of humans. So he's kind of developing them. He was basically involved in wiping out the engineers as well on that planet, those progenitors of mankind. So he's kind of like the catalyst of like the entire rest of the franchise. At least is like.
So these are prequels.
Those are prequels, yeah. So okay. And then
just so timeline wise, so Prometheus is 2089. You said.
Yes, and I guess
so. That means all of the Alien and Aliens and that stuff is like after that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's like 2100 and beyond, essentially. So the original 1975 Alien takes place in 2122. So I think it's like 22 years after Covenant. Then
it's coming up.
Yeah, pretty soon.
We'll see what happens, I guess.
And so, like other prequels that come later, that kind of add a lot of complication to the story. This is a pretty simple, straightforward movie in a way. Basically, a commercial spaceship is on its way back to Earth. Its crew is in hypersleep and stasis, and then they're awakened by a distress signal on the ship's computer that sees this transmission. They investigate it, or the corporation they work for tells them to investigate it. And they find eggs. One of them steps on it, and all hell breaks loose. Basically, that's where the chest burster comes from. One of them bursts out of the chest of a crew member, and then essentially, there's only really one alien in that movie for the majority of the runtime. that is chasing Sigourney Weaver and the rest of the crew members. So it's kind of like a slasher movie on this spaceship where Sigourney Weaver's like the final girl in a way.
Okay. So the people that have the alien inside of them, can they tell it's coming, or do they know there's something wrong with them?
I mean, I think, yeah, they'll kind of feel it physically, I guess.
Kind of like when you know a sneeze is about to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. So I can empathize with these people.
And you'll see it like crawling around, like bulging on their skin and stuff, and then it'll burst out. Yeah.
That's disgusting.
Oh, and in that one, you later find out that the crew member Ash is an android that the corporation Weyland-Yutani placed on board with orders to return a xenomorph specimen to them, even at the expense of the crew's lives. So that's some like kind of common theme that'll keep coming back. Following this, actually, there's a video game, Alien Isolation, where you play as Ellen Ripley's daughter, and it's a similar kind of thing where you have to fight and hide from a xenomorph on board a ship. But then,
Would you say they're xenophobic?
yeah, they're afraid of the xenomorphs. Yeah. Then Aliens takes place 57 years later, but it still stars Ellen Ripley, or the character Ellen Ripley, played by Sigourney Weaver. She has been in hypersleep the whole time, and she's persuaded to accompany these Marines to the planet from the first film, which the Weyland-Yutani Corporation has begun to colonize, and it recently lost contact with that planet. So then they, again, end up fighting their lives.
Happens 57 years
Yeah.
later. Doesn't she look the same?
Yeah, she was in hypersleep the entire time. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's like a kind of more of an action movie where there's a bunch of aliens and they fight for their lives against a bunch of them and rescue the only survivor of that civilization, a little girl named Newt. And then Alien Cubed, or Alien to the Third Power. It's written as Alien with a 3, it's a really
Exponent.
weird title. Yeah, as an exponent. Yeah, because these sequels can never have normal names, I guess. But that takes place like 5 minutes later. So from 57 years later to like just right after, Newt has died. Like the kid that she rescued from the last movie dies off screen.
What can
Basically,
happen in 5 minutes?
So just completely undoes the whole movie.
yeah, like I think Aliens is maybe the only one that ends on like a positive note, and then it just undone in the like first 5 minutes of the next movie.
Wow. That's how you know it's a good movie. When you get rid of everything a really good movie did.
Yeah, I know. But in that one, Ripley discovers that she has the alien queen growing inside her. And at the end of the movie, she tries to kill both herself and the alien inside her so that the corporation can't exploit it, like can't get hold of her and exploit it. But then Alien Resurrection takes place 200 years later, after Ripley has died and everything, but she's cloned. But the clone that was developed was the clone of her that had the alien embryo growing inside her. So they're able to develop the alien embryo as well.
And that's still Sigourney Weaver.
Yes, still Sigourney Weaver. Yeah.
Well, they had to clone her.
They had to clone her for the movie.
for the movie.
That's how she's credited. It's a Sigourney Weaver's clone.
That one's not very good. But basically,
I'm glad we're both being realistic about
Yeah,
this. I
there's-
was talking smack about some of my movies. Like,
there's some that just aren't very good.
those
But
are kind of worse, though. So
I don't know about that. So yeah, that's a similar thing where in this one she's got the alien queen inside her. There are aliens on the ship that it's interesting because it is interesting in part because she kind of, because of the queen being inside her and because she's not really the same Ellen Ripley, she has this kind of affinity toward them in some ways, or is like they won't attack her.
Does she have like the memories of Ellen Ripley?
you've got to. I mean, that's like basically the plot of every clone movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not how cloning works.
Correct, but I mean, not that I would know because I don't clone
memories.
people.
I don't know actually. If
Well,
they
you wouldn't know
explore
what kind of memories she's got. You're not her
that. Yeah, I know.
or her
I
clone.
don't know if that might have been explored, I guess, but they might have to explain to her what, because she like is like a different. She's got like the super strength and stuff. She's like a superhero all of a sudden in that movie. But yeah, that's 200 years later. So that's the final in terms of chronology, which maybe didn't end chronologically on a great note, but the newest film takes place between the first two actually, and I think is pretty good, and it kind of combines the action of the second movie with the horror elements of the first movie. And it's like they're all trapped in a ship trying to survive from these aliens, but there's a number of them. There's actually some cool like action sequences in addition to like the kind of not survival horror because it's a video game genre, but the slasher kind of movie elements.
All right, well, thanks for giving me the rundown, I think, on the storylines. I just kind of, in my mind, want a better place, when all these came out. There's just so many films and video games and series and things like that. So if you guys could get a little bit more in the weeds of like the background of the production and kind of when all of these were released.
Sure. Yeah, I can start. So the original trilogy, that's Terminator 1, T2, and Terminator 3, 84, 91, 2003. Sarah Connor Chronicles that essentially, like I said, replaced T3, 2008 to 2009. Terminator Salvation that took place like in the Future War, 2009. Genesis, 2015. Dark Fate, 2019. That was the newest film with James Cameron. So basically, that's his trilogy. So Terminator 1, T2, and then Dark Fate from 2019, because that's kind of where he directed those three. Terminator Zero this last week. So that's kind of the rundown of that. I kind of wanted to talk about some of the comic books, because there were comic books with Terminator. Now Publishing, like NOW, Now Publishing, published 17 issues under the title The Terminator from 1988 to 1990. The series doesn't really get into like the movies. It's like new characters that are fighting alongside John Connor in that future war in the Resistance Army. So kind of like background story for like the war in 2031, I think it was, in the comic books.
That's coming up.
Yeah. And the thing is, in those comics, it's 2031, but like in the movies, it was earlier too. So it's like everything was just kind of like fluid, pretty much, as to when this was going to happen.
There was one thing in the Alien timeline that was not a movie, but it was like a fake TED Talk, basically. It was called TED 2023. So we've already passed that, actually, in that terms of timeline. But it was, I think it was Peter Weyland of Weyland-Yutani giving this like TED Talk.
Yeah.
And it came out in 2011, but it was
Did they just
TED
release it to,
2023.
like, YouTube or something?
I can't remember where they released it. I think probably as like a promo in there. Yeah.
I think I might have seen this. Was he wearing was he almost like dressed like Steve Jobs kind of thing?
I don't know. I don't remember. It's been a while since that movie came out.
There were other comic books under Dark Horse, 1990, Tempest, in 1991, One Shot, or a One Shot.
Were they like popular comic books? Because these were like, 80s, 90s.
Yeah, so I mean the 80s ones were like right in between the first two, right? So like Terminator, the first one, 84, these comic books released in 88 to 90, and then T2 came out in 91. So it's kind of like in between.
Are they like more just for people who want to like know the world better, or like are they canon or not really?
I mean, I guess they could be canon. Not really. I mean, because the thing is, the movies all are mostly set in the present. Okay. The only one that's set in the future for the most part is Salvation. I think that's all set in the future. Terminator Salvation with Christian Bale. So that's the only one that's set in the future, and there's only like brief scenes in each movie that deal with the future. So these comic books were all set in the future war. The anime Terminator Zero is also kind of set partially after as well. So there's scenes of that as well. But yeah, the comic books, it seemed like it was just like other characters that were kind of just fighting alongside John Connor in this war against the Terminators. So, those are kind of some additional things. There were a lot. There's a couple of different video games. Mucci mentioned one. I know there was a couple different video games. I'm not going to mention them. I know they were pretty good. I played some on the PS2.
Do you play as the Terminator or as
there were like you got to like kill, and there was also that arcade one. I don't know. You guys have probably played it at the arcade, right? Where you're like shooting them, and that was a really fun one that I'd always play.
my head.
where like the T-800s are like coming at your screen, and like you kind of get the aspect of like this kind of the horror kind of zombie type thing going on, because they like come out the side and they're like red eyes and stuff. It's pretty cool. Along with the release of these movies, the different timelines, there's obviously, people online like to come up with different ways of watching it. Most like kind of like the Star Wars series. I found a couple of them online. You could watch them in the order of release. You could watch them in the order of what comes up chronologically. You could watch them, just the James Cameron trilogy. You could watch them with the Sarah Chronicles, if it makes sense. The first two, Sarah Connor Chronicles, and then kind of pick up after that. So a lot of different ways to watch them.
All right.
I don't know if there's a lot of different ways to watch the Alien movies, but maybe. I guess you could watch the new one in between the first two.
Yeah, you could just watch one and be done with it.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess you could watch chronologically, as I mentioned, the story going from 2012's Prometheus and 2017's Alien Covenant. But yeah, so basically the first two I think are the most interesting to talk about. Alien, that came out in 1979, was directed by Ridley Scott, and he later went on to direct Blade Runner, Gladiator, House of Gucci, a lot of different movies. But as I mentioned before, it was developed as kind of like a horror slasher film, all taking place on one spacecraft where there's one slasher villain being like the xenomorph alien that's chasing after them. So now a lot of the tech aspects of the ship were made from old aircraft and automobiles and radio and TV sets, which is part of the development. But the most interesting thing that was developed was this completely new and different alien creature, this later called the xenomorph, and is developed by Swiss realist artist H.R. Giger, which, if you have never heard improviser and podcaster Matt Gorley doing his impression of Mr. Giger, that's a real treat. It's really funny. But unlike other aliens, and as I explained before, which is later like retcon the explanation for this, but they're not like these smart, sentient, I guess they're sentient, but they're not like humanoid creatures that think with intelligence like we do. They are kind of primal creatures. They don't speak, and they're just trying to breed. So the screenwriters...
Well, it doesn't need to be said. Go ahead.
Like probably most animals.
I was thinking these statements sound a little xenophobic.
And maybe also there's a kind of social commentary framework you can hang on it, but I haven't thought that all through, so I don't want to wade my way through that.
So you mentioned they were like later called xenomorphs. Is that not their name originally?
I mean, it's not like it's one of those things where like in the first movie you're not going to necessarily hear the name xenomorph. Oh. It's kind of like
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I mean it's sort of I don't maybe it was by the third movie they're calling them that. I can't really remember exactly when they start going like xenomorphs, and maybe aliens, and I missed it, but being 50 years later. But yeah, it's kind of like Star Wars originally was just called Star Wars, and then now it's called like Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope. Like it wasn't called A New Hope when it came out, so it's like one of those like things that's like later explained from other movies and other media and stuff. I mean, I'm pretty sure in the latest movies they just call them xenomorphs flat out, but yeah, so this design, like I said, was by H.R. Giger, and the ideas for them were by the screenwriters Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett, who developed the idea of an alien creature attacking people on the ship, but they were kind of stuck trying to figure out how the alien actually got onto the ship. And then Shusett apparently had a bizarre dream and said, "I have an idea. The monster screws one of them." And that's how the idea of these of these aliens developing from inside the body and being birthed and bursting out came about. So that one won the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, and more recently has been considered one of the best sci-fi and best horror movies of all time. And then Aliens comes out 7 years later. Now that's directed by James Cameron, who had just kind of come hot off the heels of directing the first Terminator. And there's an urban legend, but it was actually later confirmed by James Cameron to be true. But what it was that he was in a meeting with studio execs about wanting to make a sequel to Alien, this movie he loved so much. And he wrote the word alien on a page, and then he drew an S, and then 2 lines through it as an alien, like $sign. Okay. He's like, this is all you need. Aliens. There's the title, basically. And he later confirmed that's true. He said that helped get him the movie, because he said maybe it was Pavlovian conditioning when they saw the $sign connected to the word alien, or maybe it was just the confidence I projected, but they said yes. So he took a different path, though. Instead of making another horror movie, sci-fi horror movie, he made it's still in a way horror adjacent, because these are these monstrous creatures, but it's way more of like an action movie and like a war movie, where there's a lot more combat. There's like these big, huge guns that they're using to fight against the aliens and stuff, and take down way more than in the first one, where there's really only one. There's like 100 in this one. So
did the movie poster actually have it stylized as a $sign?
No. That's why it was like an urban legend for like a long time. Like he just like wrote it. I think people would say he wrote it on a chalkboard, but he confirmed that he wrote it on like the back of a script, I think, and passed it over. But yeah, it was.
I'll get into a little bit of James Cameron and the stuff that he says and his little dreams and stuff later on. But
his little dreams.
We'll get to it. Okay. I don't want to spoil too much. It's coming up, but that sounds like it's probably completely accurate.
Yeah. It sounds like, yeah. Well, I'm sure he's somewhat cocky now, but that sounds like a cocky, like hotshot director. Like, he made a really hot film and an action film, so he's looking to go like, hey, I love this movie. I want to make a sequel to it, which it really works out, because it was a critical and commercial success. The first one was like kind of muted, and I think it did well commercially, but critics were like kind of divided on it a little bit. Later came around on it, but the first one was kind of right away, or the second one was kind of right away a big hit critically and commercially, and it's regarded as one of the best sequels ever made. Many even consider it to be better than the original, although I personally like the first one better, just because I'm more of a horror person than an action person. But I think you can find things to like in both of them. But this one had 7 Oscar nominations. Sigourney Weaver was nominated for Best Actress even, which is pretty rare for sci-fi movies at the time, and even today. And then I just briefly want to talk about Alien 3. Had a very troubled production, a lot of different screenwriters. At times it was shot without a script, going through different directors. But eventually it was directed by David Fincher as his first film. And he just shortly after that directs Seven, Fight Club. I mean, years later he directs Gone Girl and stuff like that. So he's like another huge director. And I just think it's really interesting that the first 3 movies are like all pretty distinct and all directed by early movies by these really like classic great directors. Ridley Scott also comes back later to direct his 2012's Prometheus and then 2017's Alien Covenant. So he kind of comes back to go like, I want to like explore this franchise a little more. Kind of like what James Cameron did the most recent Terminator, but he did this like sort of backstory to the whole franchise. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
So did you say that one had 7 nominations? Aliens. So Alien 2. Did it win anything?
I don't know.
Okay.
Well, I probably should know that.
It's an honor to be nominated.
It is an honor to be nominated, but let me talk about T2. All right. So T2 won 4 Oscars. So James Cameron, hot off of The Terminator, then hotter after Aliens, which came out like the next year or something, or 2 years later?
2 years later, about.
Yeah. Judgment Day came out in 91, so a couple years later after that. Receives 4 awards: Best Makeup, Best Sound Effects, Editing, Best Visual Effects. So it's like cleaned house pretty much.
We didn't know what the competition was.
Yeah, but still, I mean, it's an honor to be nominated. It's a higher one to win.
All right. Well, I think we've heard quite a bit so far. So I think it seems like a good time to take a brief recess, during which we will play a short game segment called Interrogatories. So we have done this in a previous episode, but as a refresher, in the legal world, these are a list of questions that is sent to the other side and answered under oath. And so on OTR, similarly to real life interrogatories, each of the debaters will write down questions for the other debater to answer about their chosen side. I'll read them, and obviously we'll tally up the points, and a small win that it will result in a small win that won't really affect the outcome of my decision on the debate itself. But you guys ready?
Yeah, let's do it. I got my questions. Mucci looks like he's got his stupid ass questions.
All right, thank you both. All right, so who wants to go first? Who wants to answer a question first?
I'll answer first.
Okay.
Get out ahead early.
So, question number 1 for Mucci.
Don't look, Mucci.
All right, it's going to be a question about what movie is this quote from? And the quote is, "You see, we've got a good place to wait here, and until now, no temptation." Do you know which movie this is from?
Yeah, it's from Alien 3 because it's on the prison colony.
All right. All right. I think right.
This is 3,
That
right?
is,
That's
that's
probably right.
correct.
And I did
Sometimes get confused between that one and the next one.
okay. Yeah. Well, you know.
All right, Orlando.
Okay.
In the original Terminator, how many Sarah Connors get killed before he finds the Sarah Connor he's looking for?
So I know that he goes through the phone book. And
Half a point for that, man.
okay. And let's say 5.
That is incorrect. It was 2.
Oh, okay.
I think there's a lady that gets shot in her home, and then like
Yeah.
one other one, right? Yeah.
It's I always, when it comes to like the Terminators trying to locate the people, I always, the one that's most memorable to me is in T2, where John Connor, the teenager John Connor, and Arnold, the T-800 that's protecting him, they call his foster parents to see, like,
Right.
he's like, no, we can't go back there. We can't go back there. Okay, let's at least call them. They call them. And the T-1000 is mimicking the voice of the foster mom.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, that's not your, they're dead. They're fucking gone.
He says they're fucking.
He says they're fucking gone. He learned swearing very quickly.
You ready for the next one?
Yes.
All right. So, Ripley is cloned from blood samples taken from the previous planet she was on where she died in Aliens 3. After many attempts to create a Ripley that they could use to host an alien baby, Ripley is number 8. Where is this number on Ripley's body?
I want to say her, like, shoulder or something.
The answer I have is her arm.
Okay.
Now, where on her arm? I don't know. Is the shoulder part of your arm?
No, I don't think that counts.
All right. Well, so far, I think the score is 1 Mucci, maybe half Orlando.
Yeah, half.
But maybe in the second question.
Okay, we'll see.
Fill in the blank in this quote by Kyle Reese.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's the entire
Please.
blank.
The Terminator's a blank unit. Part man, part machine.
Something organic unit, something processor, something
Incorrect.
learning computer.
The word we were looking for was infiltration.
Yeah, that's what they are. Okay.
So.
All right, so it is 1
Because
to
they're supposed to, in the movies, they're supposed to be like, the reason why the machine is, they put like the skin and like organic matter on them is so that they could blend in.
Yeah.
But then they use fucking Arnold Schwarzenegger, this huge fucking guy.
Most robotic looking sounding guy.
It's like, okay, there's a bodybuilder in this post-apocalyptic era where nobody's eating because we're all starving. Yeah, he's gonna blend in.
Maybe that's what they think will blend in the 80s.
They don't know.
Well, I mean, he would blend in with me because I also have red eyes right now from cat allergies. All right, you ready for the last question? Again, the score right now is 1 Mucci, half Orlando. All right, where did the first alien erupt from in the movie?
Like which person or?
Just where?
I think so, it was someone's chest on the crew, right? Or was it
Define
chest?
someone.
One of the men?
Define men.
I don't know his name.
To clarify, this was in Aliens 3, I think, from Alien 3.
Okay.
Oh, what? Oh, okay.
I didn't realize that I had basically made the questions all about Alien 3, and you had just recently seen Alien 3.
So where did the first alien erupt from in Aliens 3?
You said define man, define. Oh, and that one then a dog?
Fuck.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. That was a real mystery, actually. That was okay, got it. Okay.
I think the time buzzer would have gone off on this one.
Probably.
I was Alien 3 that time.
I did give a
The,
couple
the
hints.
hints at it.
But
All right, let's go to the next one.
well,
Do I have another one? I have another one,
yes,
right?
you do have one more chance for redemption.
Oh, God.
Although I don't think you can tally enough points to win or tie, unless you get 1.5 points in this one. So the question is, what 2 words does Sarah Connor carve into a wood table in Terminator 2?
1 point per word.
Per word.
No fate.
That is correct. Unfortunately,
But what we make.
Let's give this partial credit for a half point for the full quote. So yeah, 2-2.
Okay.
All right, there we go.
You got another question for me?
No.
Okay.
Well, the interrogatories ended in a tie. Will the debate end in a tie? We'll find out.
All right.
Probably not. But
Has that ever happened?
But before we get back into our last question, do us a quick favor and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, whatever you're on. Give us a like, a review, and let's get back into the question. All right, so my last question is, have you ever been mistaken for a man?
No. Have you?
I have been mistaken for a man, but actually it wasn't a mistake. No, but my real last question, obviously, will be tying this back to the law, which we normally do in all our episodes.
And was that first question about?
It's a quote from Aliens,
Okay.
a movie I'm very familiar with.
I was very confused.
Now he is, and you'll be even more so.
Okay.
In a minute.
All right, yeah. So if you could just bring us back to the law, kind of generally anything that you'd like.
Yeah. So corporate law, I want to talk about a little bit, just in terms of the corporation in the films, the Alien films. So the Weyland-Yutani Corporation has been obsessed with obtaining and examining a xenomorph specimen at any cost, even the lives of its employees, often without explaining anything to them. So I found this research paper by Penny Crofts, and the research paper is called Aliens, Legal Conceptions of the Corporate Invasion. And it analyzes different perspectives on corporate legal liability for that Weyland-Yutani Corporation. So it actually is an Australian publication, so it discusses how in Australian and UK law, corporate accountability is usually you would have to go after the heads of the corporation rather than in the US, which is what we discussed before. It's very common for there to be vicarious liability for actions of the corporation.
Unless you pierce the veil.
Right, and piercing the corporate veil is another thing. Yeah, so anyway, in Aliens, the human villain is kind of like a middle manager of the corporation. So this article kind of discusses whether he would be liable under their laws as like the heads of a corporation because he's not quite that high up to make these like decisions of the corporation as a like distinct legal entity. And it discusses this whole conception of corporations as like an individual when it's made up of a collection of individuals, and how that can kind of fall short because there are ways to hold a corporation liable and should be ways to hold a corporation liable that aren't applicable to you and me as a person. So there's like liability for the corporate culture and the corporate policies advocating that you do something that is bad, which is not really something that is like usually applied to individuals. It's usually so. Anyway, it discusses the different conceptions of how you would find a corporation liable and discusses the Weyland-Yutani Corporation. So in the movie Aliens, this middle manager guy kind of distances himself from the corporation. He lies to Ripley and says like, oh, I am from the corporation, but you can trust me, and gives her a reason to go to this planet that is, he's not telling her the whole truth, and he's not telling her that they want to find a specimen on that planet, and he promises that they'll go and kill the aliens rather than bring specimens back. So
She believed that?
yeah. She says, "Promise me we'll kill them all," and he says, "Yes, I promise you." And then he obviously wants to take one of those back. So yeah, so he's, as we discussed vicarious liability before, he is making intentional actions. There's not negligence. So there is often a way where it's difficult to find a corporation liable for intentional actions. But if the culture would approve of that, if it's something that they either told him beforehand was okay to do or later retroactively said, like, approved of it, then they could be held liable.
I think in Prometheus, I mean, wasn't it Weyland himself? That old freaking guy that was on the ship, and then everything was going to hell there with the android and everything. So I feel like that would be something where they'd be a little bit more justified in suing the company and be able to get them, because I mean it's the head of the fucking company at that point, right?
It kind of discusses how in the later movies it becomes more apparent that the heads of the company are doing things bad. In the second movie, it was kind of still kept a little bit vague.
Some guy trying to get ahead.
Yeah, really. I mean, I think in a way he's trying to get ahead, just like Kramer. So yeah, they kind of also compare the corporation itself to the aliens as well. So they say, like, Weyland-Yutani doesn't have any specific malice toward human beings. It's a corporation. It's not an individual. It can't have malice. But like the aliens, it is dependent on humans as workers and consumers. So damage to the human beings and the environment is collateral for the purpose of which corporations are created. The maximization of profits for the owners, the shareholders. So it's talking about how, like, a corporation shouldn't be viewed as a person, as an individual, because its goals are like these aliens. Like they're just made to maximize profits, often at the expense of human beings falling by the wayside. And that there should be an alternative way to find corporations liable that isn't specifically trying to get a middle manager to be vicariously liable for a corporation, or to try somehow to find liability for the heads of the corporation, which usually will protect themselves against any kind of liability.
Yeah, I wonder if there was if there would be like a U.S. law equivalent article here that, I think generally, like, corporations are viewed as people here and have a lot of rights. Sometimes more rights than actual people.
Right. I mean, they kind of
But I found that interesting too, just in like the way we speak. Generally, I think in U.S. English, like, corporations or any groups are viewed as one. So like we would say, like, Weyland-Yutani is responsible for these things, versus like British English would be like Weyland-Yutani are responsible for these things. They're not viewed as individuals, but that's another discussion we can have. Anyway, any legal issues or...
There were issues. Okay. There were issues with James Cameron, and this is what I kind of alluded to earlier, with him being a little bit cocky on certain things and claiming certain things in interviews or whatever. Well, when it came to the Terminator, James Cameron claimed to have the idea of the Terminator movies from a fever dream that he had. So this interview took place on the Terminator Blu-ray edition, like their commentary on it or whatever. He stated that I was in a foreign city by myself and I felt very dissociate from humanity in general. It was very easy to project myself into these two characters from the future who were out of sync, out of time, out of place, which kind of seems kind of weird. Okay, like you're in a different city and
so you think you're from the future,
and all of a sudden, like, you don't feel like you're on Earth with the same people, and you're dealing with robots.
Now that sounds xenophobic.
So I mentioned that because there was a Outer Limits episode called Soldier, that aired September. I wrote it down as September 19th, 1964. All right, by Harlan Ellison, a short story by Harlan Ellison, who ended up suing James Cameron because essentially the premise of Soldier was these two soldiers kind of zap each other fighting in a future war. They zap each other, get sent back in time, right? They get sent back in time. One of the soldiers being tracked down by the other one. And a soldier kind of gets attached to a family and is questioned by certain individuals. And he's just talking to them about this future war, sounding kind of insane. Well, in Terminator, there is Kyle Reese, who goes back in time to save Sarah Connor. And when he's questioned by the authorities about what he's doing and all this stuff, because he gets into kind of trouble and stuff, he gets caught by the police, and he's telling them, this is my name, this is my rank, essentially kind of the same conversation almost. So there's very close elements from Soldier that play out in Terminator. James Cameron does. He gets sued by Ellison. They end up settling. In Terminator credits after the fact, they change them because of that. The settlement's not disclosed, obviously, but they do change the credits on the films after that. James Cameron does talk about it afterwards when kind of doing press for Terminator 2. He stated that for legal reasons, I'm not supposed to comment on that, but... And then he continues to comment on it by saying it was a real bum deal. I had nothing to do with it. I just disagree with it. And then in 2009, he then talks about the lawsuit in a book, The Futurist, The Life and Films of James Cameron, that basically says it was a nuisance lawsuit that could have been easily fought, and that he thought that he could have been represented better, and they abandoned him, and this and that. Harlan Ellison is a parasite who can kiss my ass. So no remorse, no regret there. It was a fever dream. I came up with this idea in a fever dream watching Outer Limits.
Sounds like how George Harrison was liable for writing that song that was very similar to that other 60s song. And he was like, I mean, he thinks he independently came up with it, but obviously he had heard it before and it wormed its way into his brain and he copied it. May not be intentional that he thought of it, but it was kind of still copied.
Yeah, right. And that's the thing. When you do things that are creative and you have influences, it's going to be hard not to be influenced by something or get it. And also, the subconscious mind works in different ways that you don't know. So, I mean, could elements have gotten in? Sure. Yeah. That he probably didn't even attribute to it at the time. But after the fact, when he's being sued, right. you probably should acknowledge it.
Yeah, this timeline matches up where this came out before this.
Right. Yeah. And I directly copied this scene almost. He did in a 1991, not to throw all of his business out there, but in a 1991 interview, he basically did say that he got into the science fiction genre because of Ellison. So that's kind of damning, I think, to basically call this person out as getting you into it and then doing something that's very derived from it, and then
calling him a parasite.
Yeah, then calling him a parasite. So James Cameron, make some Avatar movies.
And Titanic. All right, so I think we've heard a lot of both of you defending each of your sides, but I think for the closing today, just want to very briefly hear about your attacks on the other side. And again, just stressing briefly and attack.
Sounds good.
Okay, Mucci, go ahead.
So with the Alien franchise, unlike with Terminator, where you have two movies directed by one director and then other directors come along and do their own crazy things with it, with Alien, you have Ridley Scott starting out, and then you have James Cameron expanding on it, and then you have another interesting one from another interesting director, David Fincher. And then even the next one's written by Joss Whedon. It's kind of a misfire, but it's still interesting that you see all these different people with their influences. But then Ridley Scott comes back and gets to retell his own story and expand upon his own universe, which is a really interesting way to expand upon the storyline and make it different from Terminator, which I think loses its identity after the first two movies.
From what I heard you comparing and kind of putting them in the same league, same kind of classification, in that there's multiple directors for both franchises. I mean, James Cameron, I knocked him just a little bit ago, but he does do the first two and then comes back to expand on the Terminator franchise. So, I mean, that's just kind of rebutting what he said. But what I really want to get to is the fact that the Aliens franchise kind of doesn't make sense. Like, the humans are traveling into space. They're in the ship. And these feral, as you call them, aliens that don't think whatsoever somehow are always attaching themselves to these people. And it's just like, it doesn't really make sense that a non-thinking organism is always getting in the way of these more civilized people, I would think, right? I mean, we're in 2100, and
it would be like
we're still getting knocked down by roaches at that point.
Yeah, or other creatures that used to attack and kill us, and maybe still do to this day, and then we can defend ourselves against.
But got like a plasma shield or something.
Like viruses are not sentient things as well,
Yeah.
and
You're supposed to be non-biased on this one.
Well, you guys were supposed to be brief and attacking. I don't know about that. I did
just
stress
discussing.
brief and attack. All right. anything
Aliens
else
makes
to
no
add?
sense.
Thank you for being brief and attacking. All right. So, now is the time for my deliberation with myself and my decision. So
Do you need a moment?
I kind of, was being persuaded by both sides throughout this debate, and not being familiar with really either of the franchises that well. I've maybe seen AVP in high school, and I, get all the references to Terminator, but I don't really know if I've seen it. And like, I'm not that familiar with Arnold Schwarzenegger other than him being like a big bodybuilder and the governor of California. And then Sigourney Weaver, I only know from Galaxy Quest and Finding Dory.
That's a good one.
But I think I'm going to base my decision off of which franchise I'd like to see more of. And I think right now, I would like to see the Alien franchise. So I'm going to have to give this to Mucci.
Not even the anime?
I mean, I'll get to it eventually. I have a long list.
A
of
long
anime.
list, yeah. We've heard about this long
This
list.
is actually historic because this is the first win for Aliens.
Oh.
Well,
So-
it has been.
Well, actually, I don't know. I can't remember the second one. We'll discuss it later.
All right. Well, hasta la vista.
Bye.
Thanks.